My name is Norton and I'm 24 years old, a senior in college working 3 jobs to make ends meet. That night started like any normal family dinner, until Dad casually asked if my $2,000 monthly allowance was enough. I froze mid-bite and said, "What allowance?" The sound of Mom's fork clattering against her plate echoed through the sudden silence. Her face went ghostly pale as the family secret began to unravel before my eyes. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever discovered a painful family secret that changed everything. Growing up, I thought we were the picture-perfect American family. My father, William, was a successful attorney at a prestigious law firm in Boston, often working late hours, but always providing well for us. My mother, Rebecca, managed our household finances, a responsibility my father gladly handed over since he was too busy with his cases. Then there was my sister Audrey, just 2 years younger than me, with her perfect blonde curls and winning smile that seemed to charm everyone, especially our mother. From the outside, we appeared happy, living in our spacious colonial house in the suburbs with family vacations twice a year and birthday celebrations that always felt special. But beneath that polished surface, there were subtle differences in how we were treated that I noticed from an early age but couldn't quite articulate. "Norton, be a big boy and let Audrey have the last cookie," Mom would say. Or, "Norton, why don't you give Audrey your new video game controller? Girls need special treatment, you know." These small incidents accumulated over the years, creating an invisible wall between my sister and me. Dad rarely noticed these dynamics. His work kept him at the office until late evening most days, and on weekends he tried to compensate by taking us fishing or to baseball games. I treasured those moments with him, as they were the only times I felt truly valued in our family. I wasn't a perfect kid, but I did well in school, maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, made the varsity swimming team, and even won the state debate championship in my junior year. Each achievement felt like a desperate attempt to earn the same admiration from Mom that Audrey received simply for existing. "That's nice," Norton, Mom would say after each accomplishment, her tone flat and unimpressed. But when Audrey brought home a B- on a test, it was celebration time. "Oh, darling, you're so smart. Let's go shopping to reward your hard work." As we entered our teenage years, the disparity grew more pronounced. Audrey became increasingly entitled, her natural charm hardening into something more calculated. She learned to manipulate Mom with expert precision, batting her eyelashes or producing a few tears whenever she wanted something. "Mom, everyone at school has the new iPhone. I'm literally the only one still using last year's model," she would whine, and within days a new phone would appear. When I asked for new running shoes because mine had holes in them, Mom told me to get a job. So I did. At 16, I started working weekends at the local grocery store, stocking shelves and bagging groceries. The paycheck wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of independence I desperately craved. I bought my own clothes, paid for my own school supplies, and saved what little I could for college. Meanwhile, Audrey's closet overflowed with designer labels. She received a brand new car for her 16th birthday, while I continued to bike 5 miles to work, regardless of weather. During her junior year of high school, Mom took her on a girls' trip to New York City for a weekend of Broadway shows and shopping sprees. "You wouldn't enjoy it anyway," Norton, Mom dismissed when I questioned why I never got similar trips. "Boys don't appreciate these things like girls do." Dad remained largely oblivious to these disparities. When he did witness something particularly unfair, he would intervene. But these moments were rare. I began to wonder if I was imagining things, if perhaps this was normal in families with sons and daughters. But conversations with friends confirmed that what I was experiencing wasn't typical. "Dude, that's messed up," my best friend Tyler said after I explained how Audrey received a $500 weekly allowance while I worked 20 hours a week for minimum wage. "My sister and I get the same allowance, and our parents split everything 50-50. As high school graduation approached, I focused on college applications with laser intensity. I knew education was my ticket to independence, to a life where I could define my own worth rather than constantly seeking validation from a mother who seemed incapable of giving it to me. When acceptance letters arrived, I had several options, including a partial scholarship to Boston University. Dad seemed proud. Mom gave her usual tepid acknowledgement, and Audrey barely looked up from her phone. I chose Boston University, close enough to visit occasionally, but far enough to start building my own life. What I didn't know then was that my decision to attend college would reveal just how deep the favoritism in our family ran, and how far my mother was willing to go to maintain Audrey's golden child status at my expense. College hit me like a freight train. Despite my partial scholarship covering about 40% of my tuition, the remaining costs were staggering. Textbooks alone cost $800 my first semester. The dormitory fees, meal plans, and various university charges quickly depleted the savings I'd accumulated from my high school job. By the third week of my freshman year, I realized I needed to find work immediately, or risk dropping out. I secured a position as a server at a restaurant near campus, working dinner. Shifts from 5 to midnight, 4 nights a week. The tips were decent, but barely covered my basic expenses. Soon I added a weekend job at the university library and began tutoring other students in writing and debate whenever I could squeeze it in. My typical day started at 7 in the morning for classes, continued through afternoon study sessions, then straight to the restaurant until midnight, followed by homework until 2 or 3 in the morning. Weekends were split between library shifts and tutoring. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. 2 months into this grueling schedule, I caught a nasty flu that knocked me out for a week. Unable to work, I watched my meager bank account dwindle to double digits. In desperation, I called home. "Mom, I hate to ask, but I'm really struggling financially here." I explained, my voice hoarse from coughing. "I missed a week of work because I've been sick, and I'm worried about making rent this month. Could you and Dad maybe help me out? Just this once." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before Mom responded, her voice oddly tight. "Norton, we're having some financial difficulties ourselves right now. Your father's firm is going through changes, and we need to be careful with our spending." "Oh," I said, surprised, since Dad had never mentioned any problems at work. "Maybe just a small loan, then I can pay it back when I'm working again." "That's not possible right now," she said firmly. "You need to learn financial responsibility, Norton. This is part of becoming an adult." I ended the call feeling defeated and more alone than ever. That night, as I sipped the only food I could afford, instant ramen noodles, I mindlessly scrolled through social media and froze when I saw Audrey's latest post, a selfie in front of the Eiffel Tower with the caption, "Paris dreams coming. True. Thanks, Mom, for the surprise semester abroad." My hands shook as I clicked through more of her recent posts: shopping bags from Chanel and Louis Vuitton, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, weekend trips to Nice and Monaco. Each image felt like a physical blow. My sister was living a life of luxury in Paris, while I could barely afford ramen, and my mother had claimed the family was facing financial difficulties. I called Dad immediately, but it went to voicemail. He was probably in court or a meeting. I decided not to leave a message. What would I even say? That Mom was lying? That I suspected she was favoring Audrey to an extreme degree? It sounded petty and childish, even though the evidence was right there on my screen. Instead, I picked up extra shifts at the restaurant, started donating plasma twice a week for an additional $160 a month, and cut my food budget to the bare minimum. I lost 15 pounds that semester, but managed to stay enrolled. My sophomore year brought new challenges. I moved off campus to save money, sharing a cramped apartment with 3 other students to split the rent. My course load intensified, making my work schedule even more difficult to maintain. I developed insomnia from stress and started experiencing anxiety attacks before exams. Then disaster struck. During finals week of my sophomore year, I collapsed during my shift at the restaurant. My manager called an ambulance. Despite my protests about the cost, the diagnosis: severe pneumonia complicated by exhaustion and malnutrition. The doctor ordered me to stay in the hospital for 3 days. "You're working yourself to death," Dr. Andrews told me bluntly as I lay in the hospital bed, an IV dripping antibiotics into my arm. "Your immune system is compromised from stress and poor nutrition. This isn't sustainable." The hospital bill came to over $5,000 even after insurance covered part of it. In tears, I called home again. "Mom, I'm in serious trouble." I explained, detailing my hospitalization and the massive bill. I really need help this time. Norton, I told you we're having our own financial issues, she replied, her voice cold. You got yourself into this situation with poor planning. Your father and I can't bail you out every time you mismanage your money. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, wondering what I had done to deserve such indifference from my own mother. That night, my roommate Jacob visited me in the hospital, bringing homemade soup and a shocking offer. My parents want to help with your hospital bill, he said. They've got some money set aside, and they said no one should have to choose between health and education. I initially refused, pride making it difficult to accept such generosity from people who weren't even family. But Jacob's parents insisted, saying I could repay them when I was in a position to do so. Their kindness stood in stark contrast to my own mother's callousness, making the situation even more painful to process. After that, I limited my calls home to major holidays. Dad always sounded genuinely happy to hear from me, asking about classes and offering encouragement. Mom remained distant, often finding reasons to end our conversations quickly. Audrey returned from Paris after her semester abroad, but immediately began planning her next international adventure. 3.5 years passed this way, with me working multiple jobs, barely sleeping and stretching every dollar to its breaking point. I was a senior now, just one semester away from graduation, when I received an unexpected call from Dad. Norton, I'm turning 55 next month, and I want the whole family together for a dinner celebration, he said, his voice warm with excitement. It's been too long since we've all been in the same room. Will you come home for the weekend? Despite my complicated feelings about returning home, I couldn't refuse Dad on his birthday. Of course I'll be there, I promised, unaware that this simple family dinner was about to expose a betrayal far deeper than I could have imagined. I arrived at my childhood home on a Friday evening in October. The familiar scent of Mom's pot roast filled the air as I walked up the driveway, carrying a small duffel bag and the wrapped birthday gift for Dad, a vintage fountain pen I'd saved for months to purchase. The house looked exactly the same, right down to the welcome mat that had graced our front porch since I was 10 years old. Dad answered the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a bear hug that momentarily transported me back to simpler times. Norton, God, it's good to see you, son, he said, genuine warmth in his voice. Come in. Come in. Your mother and sister are in the kitchen. I followed him inside, noting how he seemed to have aged since I last saw him 6 months ago. More gray peppered his dark hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. Still, he moved with the same confident energy I remembered. Mom offered a stiff hug when I entered the kitchen, her perfume expensive and unfamiliar. You've lost weight, she observed, though her tone contained no real concern. Audrey sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up briefly, offering a casual, "Hey, Norton," before returning to whatever had captured her attention on the screen. She looked different, more polished, if that was possible. Her clothes were obviously expensive. Her hair professionally styled, her nails perfectly manicured. Dinner's almost ready, Mom announced. Norton, why don't you wash up and then help your father set the table? The meal started pleasantly enough, with Dad asking general questions about my classes and plans after graduation. I kept my answers vague, not wanting to detail my financial struggles or the fact that I was considering postponing graduation because I couldn't afford my final semester's tuition. Inevitably, the conversation turned to Audrey. Tell Norton about your apartment in Paris, Mom prompted, her voice taking on the animated quality she reserved exclusively for discussions about my sister. Audrey's eyes lit up. It's this amazing little place in the 6th arrondissement. Just a 5-minute walk from Luxembourg Gardens. The building is from the 1800s, with the cutest little balcony overlooking this charming cafe. Sounds expensive, I remarked before I could stop myself. Oh, it is, Audrey confirmed without a trace of self-consciousness. But Mom found this amazing deal through her friend's real estate connection, and anyway, you can't put a price on the Parisian experience. She launched into stories about her shopping expeditions along Champs-Élysées, weekend trips to wine country, and the absolutely essential $2,000 coat she'd purchased for the Parisian winter. I mean, everyone in Paris has a quality wool coat, she explained, as if justifying the purchase. You simply can't function in society there without proper attire. I nodded politely, pushing pot roast around my plate and trying not to calculate how many plasma donations it would take me to afford such a coat. And then it happened. As Mom cleared the dinner plates and brought out Dad's birthday cake, Dad turned to me with a casual question that would shatter our family's foundation. By the way, Norton, is the monthly allowance sufficient? $2,000 still covering your expenses? Okay. The fork I was holding clattered against my plate. What allowance? I asked, genuinely confused. Dad's brow furrowed. The money we've been sending each month since you started college, $2,000. Your mother handles the transfers. I glanced at Mom, who had suddenly gone very still, her face draining of color. The cake in her hands trembled slightly. Dad, I haven't received any monthly allowance, I said slowly, my mind racing to make sense of what I was hearing. Not a single dollar. Dad turned to Mom, confusion evident on his face. Rebecca, what's going on? We agreed to send Norton $2,000 each month for living expenses while he's in school. Mom carefully set the cake down on the table, her movements deliberate, as if buying time to formulate a response. William, let's discuss this later, she said tightly. No, let's discuss it now. Dad insisted, his attorney voice emerging. We've been setting aside $2,000 every month for Norton's college expenses. That's nearly $100,000 over 4 years. Where has that money been going, if not to our son? Audrey suddenly became intensely interested in her napkin, avoiding eye contact with everyone at the table. I've been working 3 jobs, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the anger beginning to build inside me. I've been donating plasma twice a week. I ended up in the hospital last year because I was working so much I got pneumonia. I called home for help with the hospital bill, and Mom said the family was having financial difficulties. Dad's expression morphed from confusion to shock to anger in the span of seconds. Rebecca, explain this right now. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Can we please not ruin your birthday dinner with financial discussions? It's already ruined, Dad said firmly. Norton, come with me to my office. I want to show you something. I followed Dad to his home office, where he unlocked a filing cabinet and pulled out several folders. He opened one containing bank statements and began flipping through pages. Here, he said, pointing to a recurring monthly transfer. $2,000 transferred from our joint account to another account every month for the past 4 years. Rebecca told me this was your account. I shook my head, a cold sensation spreading through my chest. That's not my account number. I've never seen that account. Dad's face hardened as he pulled out his phone and made a call. After authenticating himself with the bank, he asked about the account in question. The color drained from his face as he listened to the response. Thank you, he said before hanging up. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of anger and profound sadness. That account is in your mother's name. A separate account I didn't know about. We returned to the dining room, where Mom sat rigidly in her chair while Audrey examined her manicure with unnatural intensity. Rebecca, Dad said, his voice dangerously calm. You and I need to have a very serious conversation about where Norton's college money has been going. The 4 of us moved to the living room, the birthday cake forgotten on the dining table. Dad positioned himself across from Mom while Audrey and I sat on opposite ends of the sofa. The tension in the air was so thick I could barely breathe. Start talking, Rebecca, Dad demanded, his attorney voice in full effect. Where has Norton's allowance been going for the past 4 years? Mom straightened her posture, attempting to maintain her composure. I made what I believed was the best decision for our family, she began, her voice controlled. Norton has always been more independent and resourceful than Audrey. I knew he could manage on his own. That wasn't your decision to make, Dad interrupted. We agreed that both children would receive financial support through college. I've been working 60-hour weeks partly to ensure our children wouldn't have to struggle like I did. Mom's expression hardened. Boys and girls have different needs, William. Norton needs to learn to be a provider, to work hard, and build character. Audrey needs our support to develop her social connections and establish herself in the right circles. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you deliberately withheld money that Dad intended for me. Money that could have prevented me from working 3 jobs and ending up in the hospital. Don't be so dramatic, Norton mom replied dismissively. Many students work during college. It builds character. Where did the money go, Mom? I pressed, though I already suspected the answer. Mom glanced briefly at Audrey before responding. I redistributed the funds to areas of greater need within our family. Dad slammed his hand on the coffee table, causing us all to jump. Stop the evasive nonsense and tell us exactly what happened to Norton's money. After a tense silence, Mom finally admitted the truth. I transferred the funds to a separate account that I used to support Audrey's studies abroad and her living expenses in Paris. The room went completely silent. I looked at Audrey, who was now studying the carpet with intense focus. You knew about this, I asked her directly. Audrey squirmed uncomfortably. Not exactly. I mean, I knew Mom was helping me financially, but I didn't know specifically where the money was coming from. Be honest, Audrey Mom interjected. We discussed this arrangement several times. Audrey's cheeks flushed red. Fine. Yes, I knew it was money that was originally meant for you, but Mom said you didn't need it, that you were doing fine on your own. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Doing fine, I was working until 2 in the morning and then getting up for 8 a.m. classes. I was living on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. I lost 15 pounds my first semester because I couldn't afford proper food. Dad looked devastated. How much of Norton's money went to Audrey? All of it. Mom lifted her chin defiantly. Yes, the full amount. As I said, it was a redistribution based on need. $96,000. Dad calculated aloud, his voice hollow. You diverted $96,000 from our son, without my knowledge or consent. The full impact of that number hit me like a physical blow. $96,000. With that money, I could have focused on my studies instead of working myself to exhaustion. I could have afforded proper nutrition and medical care. I could have graduated on time, maybe even pursued internships that would have advanced my career, instead of working menial jobs just to survive. Do you have any idea what I've been through? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've been skipping meals to pay for textbooks. I've been donating plasma twice a week to make rent. When I got pneumonia, I begged the hospital to discharge me early because I couldn't afford another night's stay. And while Norton was in the hospital, Dad added, turning to Audrey, you were using his money to buy a $2,000 coat in Paris. Audrey at least had the decency to look ashamed. I didn't know he was in the hospital. Mom never told me. I turned back to Mom. I called you from the hospital. I told you I needed help with the bill. You said the family was having financial difficulties. We were, Mom insisted. Maintaining Audrey's lifestyle in Paris was quite expensive. Dad stood up abruptly. This is beyond comprehension, Rebecca. You've been lying to me for years. You've watched our son struggle unnecessarily while funneling his support money to our daughter for luxury purchases. It wasn't just luxury purchases, Mom protested. It was an investment in Audrey's future. The connection she's making in Paris will serve her well in her career. And what about Norton's future? Dad demanded. Did you ever think about the impact your actions would have on him? On his health? On his education? On his relationship with his sister? And with you? Mom remained silent, her expression defiant rather than remorseful. I trusted you, I said quietly, the hurt in my voice palpable. Every time I called home asking for help, you made me feel like I was failing, like I wasn't trying hard enough. Do you have any idea what that did to me? You're stronger for it, Mom replied. Look at how resourceful you've become. I'm not stronger, I countered, my voice breaking. I'm exhausted. I have insomnia and anxiety. I've missed out on normal college experiences because I've been working constantly just to survive. And the worst part is knowing my own mother orchestrated my suffering while helping my sister live in luxury. Dad turned to Audrey. And you were complicit in this deception. You knew the money was meant for your brother and you spent it on designer clothes and weekend trips while he could barely afford food. Audrey's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't think about it that way. Mom always said Norton was doing fine, that he preferred to be independent. Did you ever once think to check on me yourself? I asked her. To call and ask how I was really doing. Audrey shook her head, tears now streaming down her face. Number, I was selfish. I didn't want to know because I was afraid it would mean having to give up what I had. The room fell silent again, each of us processing the magnitude of what had happened. Dad finally broke the silence. Rebecca, this betrayal goes beyond our marriage. You've manipulated our children and created a rift that may never fully heal. I don't even know who you are anymore. Mom's composure finally cracked. I did what I thought was best. Norton is a man, he needs to learn to provide for himself. Audrey needed more support to thrive. That wasn't your decision to make unilaterally, Dad replied, his voice ice cold. We're talking about a deliberate, systematic deception that harmed our son physically, emotionally, and financially. I can't even look at you right now. He turned to me, his expression softening. Norton, I am so deeply sorry. I failed you by not being more involved, by trusting that the money was reaching you. I should have checked directly with you. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The betrayal felt so absolute, so overwhelming that I couldn't process it all at once. All those nights I'd gone hungry. All those mornings I'd woken up, exhausted, all those panic attacks before exams, because I'd had no time to study properly. All of it unnecessary. All of it orchestrated by my own mother. As the full weight of the situation settled over the room, I realized our family would never be the same again. The facade had cracked irreparably, revealing the rot that had been growing beneath the surface for years. After the confrontation in the living room, Dad retreated to his office to clear his head while Mom locked herself in the master bedroom. I found myself alone in the kitchen, mindlessly eating slices of the forgotten birthday cake directly from the platter when Audrey appeared in the doorway. Can we talk? She asked, hesitantly, her makeup smudged from crying. I gestured to the chair across from me, my mouth full of chocolate cake. She sat down, fidgeting with the expensive watch on her wrist. A gift from Mom, no doubt possibly purchased with money meant for my education. I don't even know where to start, Audrey said after a long silence. I swallowed the cake and pushed the platter away. How about with why you thought it was okay to spend money you knew was meant for me? She flinched at my directness but didn't immediately defend herself. Progress, I supposed. Mom always framed it as evening things out, she began. She said Dad favored you, that you were his golden child. She said my special needs as a daughter required more financial support. What special needs? Audrey, designer clothes, luxury apartments in Paris, weekend trips to Monaco. She had the grace to look embarrassed. It sounds ridiculous when you put it like that. Because it is ridiculous, I said flatly. You don't understand what it's like being the daughter Mom wanted to live vicariously through. Audrey countered, a flash of her old entitlement surfacing. The pressure to be perfect, to look perfect, to marry perfect. Oh, please, I scoffed. Try working 30 hours a week while taking a full course load. Try choosing between buying textbooks or eating dinner. Try getting pneumonia because you're so run down from working multiple jobs that your immune system gives out. Audrey's defensiveness crumbled. You really got pneumonia. Mom just said you had a cold and were being dramatic about it. I was hospitalized for 3 days. I still have medical debt from it. She looked genuinely shocked. I had no idea it was that bad. Mom always said you were doing fine, just being independent, as usual. And you never thought to check for yourself, to call your brother and ask how he was actually doing. Audrey stared down at her manicured hands. I didn't want to know, she admitted quietly. Deep down, I think I suspected things weren't as Mom described. But acknowledging that would have meant acknowledging that I was benefiting from your suffering. Her honesty surprised me. I'd expected more deflection, more of the entitlement she'd displayed throughout our childhood. Let me ask you something, I said, leaning forward. Have you ever had a job? A real job, where you punched a clock and answered to a boss? She shook her head. Mom always said I should focus on my studies and social connections. So while I was working as a server until midnight, and then getting up for 8 a.m. classes, you were attending parties and shopping on the Champs-Élysées. Yes, she whispered. And fashion internships that were really just glorified social events. And charity galas that Mom insisted would introduce me to the right people. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process my emotions. Do you know what it feels like to know your own mother values you so little that she'd watch you struggle unnecessarily while funneling your support money to your sister? Audrey's eyes filled with tears again. I can't imagine. And I'm so sorry, Norton. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry for my part in this. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in my sister's expression. Not just embarrassment at being caught, but actual regret for the pain she'd contributed to. I want to make this right, she continued. I know I can't give back the time you lost or the experiences you missed, but I can at least return some of the money. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. How? It's not like you have a savings account full of cash. Actually, I do, she admitted. Mom always insisted I save at least 20% of my allowance. And I have a lot of things I could sell. Designer clothes, jewelry, handbags. They won't recover everything, but it would be a start. I hadn't expected this. The sister I thought I knew would never have offered to sell her precious possessions. Why the sudden change of heart? I asked suspiciously. Audrey sighed. It's not sudden. Being in Paris away from Mom's constant influence, I started to see things differently. I made friends with people who actually worked for a living, who had real jobs and real problems. I started to feel like a fraud. She twisted her watch nervously. About 3 months ago, I met this guy, Antoine. He works as a sous chef. 12-hour days, 6 days a week. When I told him about my allowance, he asked what I'd done to earn it. I had no answer. That was the first time I really started questioning everything. I listened, still wary but increasingly convinced of her sincerity. The truth is, Norton, I've always been jealous of you, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Jealous of me, I couldn't hide my surprise. While you were getting everything handed to you on a silver platter, jealous of your relationship with Dad, of your intelligence, of the fact that you knew who you were and what you wanted. She wiped away a tear. Mom always made me feel like my only value was in how I looked and who I might marry someday. You gotta be valued for your mind. I had never considered this perspective before. In my mind, Audrey had always been the favored child, the one who got everything while I got nothing. I hadn't stopped to think about the different types of expectations our parents had placed on each of us. That doesn't excuse what happened, I said, not ready to let go of my anger entirely. No, it doesn't, she agreed. Nothing excuses it. But I want you to know that I'm not the same person I was when this started. And I want to help make it right. We talked for nearly 2 hours, really talked perhaps for the first time in our adult lives. Audrey detailed the psychological games Mom had played, pitting us against each other from an early age. I described the financial hardships I'd endured, the nights I'd gone to bed hungry, the constant stress of trying to balance work and school. By the end of our conversation, we had formulated a plan. Audrey would sell her designer items and empty her savings account, giving me every penny she could gather. She estimated it would amount to about $30,000, not the full $96,000, but enough to pay off my medical debt and cover my final semester's tuition. I'll get a job too, she declared. A real one. I've been thinking about coming back to the States anyway. Paris is beautiful, but it's not real life. At least not the way I've been living it. As we concluded our conversation, Audrey hesitated before asking, "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But this is a start. Actions matter more than words at this point." She nodded, accepting this answer. As she stood to leave, she paused. "Norton, for what it's worth, I've always admired you. Even when I was acting like a spoiled brat, deep down, I knew you were the stronger one." After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen, emotionally drained, but feeling a strange sense of closure with my sister. The conversation hadn't erased the past, but it had opened a door to a potentially different future for our relationship. Now I just had to face the person who had orchestrated this entire betrayal, my mother. The next morning, I found Mom alone in the kitchen, methodically wiping down already clean countertops. Dad had apparently spent the night in a hotel, and Audrey was in her room making calls to various consignment shops about selling her designer items. The house felt different. The tension still thick in the air, but changed somehow, as if the foundation itself had shifted. "We need to talk," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Mom continued wiping the counter, not looking up. I don't think there's anything left to say. Your father and sister have made their positions quite clear. I haven't, I pointed out. And since this whole situation centers around money that was meant for me, I think my position matters. She finally put down the cloth and turned to face me. I was struck by how composed she looked, as if the previous night's revelations hadn't shaken her worldview at all. Norton, I did what I thought was best for this family. She began, her tone maddeningly. Reasonable. You've always been so capable, so independent. Audrey needed more guidance, more support. Stop, I interrupted, raising my hand. Just stop with the justifications. What you did wasn't about what Audrey and I needed. It was about what you wanted. Mom's expression hardened. I'm your mother. I've devoted my life to raising you and your sister. And yet you watched me struggle for 4 years when you could have helped. You lied to Dad. You manipulated Audrey. You created this entire dynamic where she was the princess and I was. What? The family workhorse. You're being dramatic, she dismissed. Many students work during college. I nearly worked myself to death, I exclaimed, my composure slipping. I ended up in the hospital because I was so exhausted and malnourished that I got pneumonia. When I called you from that hospital bed, you told me the family couldn't afford to help me. Meanwhile, you were sending Audrey on shopping sprees in Paris with money that was meant for me. Mom crossed her arms defensively. Different children have different needs. Audrey's path required different support than yours. I stared at her, genuinely bewildered by her inability to acknowledge the harm she had caused. Do you feel any remorse at all? Any guilt about what you did? She hesitated before answering. I regret that you're upset. I regret that your father is upset. But no, I don't believe my decisions were wrong. I still believe I allocated family resources appropriately based on each child's situation. Her answer stunned me. I had expected deflection, perhaps even anger, but not this calm certainty that she had done nothing wrong. You stole from me, I said quietly. You took money that Dad intended for my education and living expenses, and you gave it to Audrey for luxury purchases. That's theft, Mom. It's a betrayal of Dad's trust, of my trust, even of Audrey's trust, because you made her complicit in your deception. I did not steal, she replied indignantly. I managed family finances as I saw fit. Against Dad's explicit instructions, I countered. He wanted that money to go to me. You knew that, and deliberately did the opposite. We went back and forth like this for nearly an hour, with Mom refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Her perspective was so foreign to me, so devoid of the basic empathy I would expect from a mother, that I struggled to find any common ground. Dad returned mid-morning, his expression grave, as he joined us in the kitchen. I've been thinking all night about how to handle this situation, he said without preamble. Mom immediately adopted a softer demeanor. William, I know you're upset, but we can work through this as a family. Rebecca, please, Dad said tiredly. I've spent the night reviewing our finances and consulting with a colleague who specializes in family law. What you've done constitutes financial infidelity. At best, fraud. At worst. Mom's composure finally cracked. You consulted a lawyer against your own wife. I needed to understand our legal options, Dad replied evenly. The fact is, you diverted $96,000 without my knowledge or consent against my explicit wishes. He turned to me. Norton, I want to make this right. I can't give you back the time you lost or the stress you endured, but I can ensure you receive the financial support you should have had all along. How? I asked. I'm proposing we liquidate one of our investment properties, Dad explained. It would generate enough cash to repay you the full $96,000, plus an additional amount to compensate for the hardship you've endured. Mom gasped. William, you can't be serious. That property is part of our retirement plan. You should have thought of that before diverting our son's college fund, Dad replied coldly. I sat there processing this offer. On one hand, the money would change my life. I could pay off my medical debt, finish my degree without financial stress, maybe even pursue graduate school. On the other hand, accepting such a large sum felt like it would bind me to this dysfunctional family situation indefinitely. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Dad nodded understanding. Of course. This is a significant decision. Mom looked between us, her expression calculating. If you do this, William, our marriage may not survive. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Dad replied quietly. What you did to Norton was unconscionable. I cannot, and will not, simply move past it, as if nothing happened. I excused myself and went for a long walk around the neighborhood, trying to sort through my conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to refuse the money out of pride to prove I could succeed without their help, just as I'd been doing for the past 4 years. Another part recognized that the money was rightfully mine. To begin with, it didn't make sense to reject it out of spite. When I returned to the house, I found Dad alone in his office. I've made my decision, I told him, sitting in the chair across from his desk. I'll accept the money, but with conditions. Dad leaned forward. What conditions? First, I want to be clear that this doesn't fix everything. The money helps with my practical problems, but it doesn't erase the betrayal or the years of favoritism. He nodded solemnly. I understand. Second, I need some distance from Mom. I can't pretend everything is fine between us. I'm not saying I'll never speak to her again, but I need time and space to process everything. That's completely reasonable, Dad agreed. Third, I want you to get therapy for yourself, for your marriage, if you choose to continue it, and family therapy if that's ever on the table in the future. Dad looked surprised but nodded. I've actually been considering that myself. This situation has made me realize how disconnected I've been from what was happening in my own home. You worked hard to provide for us, I acknowledged. But being physically absent allowed Mom to create this dysfunctional dynamic between Audrey and me. You're right, Dad admitted, his voice heavy with regret. I failed you by not being more present, by not checking on you directly. I trusted your mother to handle the finances fairly, and I never verified that the money was actually reaching you. We sat in silence for a moment, both reflecting on the past and contemplating the future. Audrey told me she's planning to sell her designer items and empty her savings to pay me back what she can, I informed him. Dad's eyebrows rose. That's unexpected. She's changing, I said. Or trying to, at least. We had a long talk last night. For the first time, I feel like we might actually have a real relationship someday without Mom's manipulation in the middle. I'm glad to hear that, Dad said, genuine relief in his voice. I've always wanted you two to be close. As our conversation wound down, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger and hurt still predominant, but also a tentative hope that something better might emerge from this painful revelation. The road ahead would be difficult, particularly with Mom still refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing, but at least the truth was finally out in the open. One more thing, I said as I stood to leave. I want you to know that I don't blame you for what happened. You thought you were providing for me, and Mom betrayed your trust too. Dad's eyes grew moist. Thank you for saying that, Norton. But I do bear responsibility. I should have been more involved, more aware. I promise to do better going forward. As I left his office, I realized that while the money would solve my immediate practical problems, the emotional healing would take much longer. The foundation of trust that families are built on had been severely damaged, and rebuilding it, if that was even possible, would require time, effort, and a willingness to change that I wasn't sure Mom possessed. But for the first time in years, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The truth, painful as it was, had finally been acknowledged. And with that acknowledgement came the possibility of genuine healing. 6 months have passed since that fateful dinner when Dad's innocent question about my allowance exposed years of deception. In that time, nearly everything in my life has changed, mostly for the better, though the journey hasn't been without its challenges. True to his word, Dad liquidated one of his investment properties and transferred $96,000 to my bank account, plus an additional $20,000 he insisted on adding to compensate for my pain and suffering. The first time I looked at my bank balance and saw 6 figures, I actually sat down on the floor of my apartment and cried. After years of counting every penny, the financial breathing room felt almost unreal. I paid off my medical debt first, then my student loans. I reduced my work hours to focus on my final semester of college, keeping just the library job because I genuinely enjoyed it. For the first time in my college career, I slept 8 hours a night, ate proper meals, and even joined a recreational basketball league, simple pleasures that had been impossible when I was working multiple jobs just to survive. Audrey followed through on her promise too. She sold most of her designer wardrobe and emptied her savings account, contributing $35,000 to what she jokingly called my restitution fund. More importantly, she moved back to the States, rented a modest apartment in Boston, and got her first real job as an assistant at a public relations firm. We meet for coffee every other week, slowly building a relationship based on honest communication rather than the toxic competition Mom had fostered. The funny thing is, I actually like working, Audrey told me during one of our coffee dates. There's this satisfaction in earning your own money that I never understood before. Welcome to how most of the world lives, I replied, but without bitterness. The anger I once felt toward her has gradually subsided as I've watched her genuine efforts to change. As for our parents, their story took a more complicated turn. Mom initially refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, maintaining that she had made the best decisions for the family. Dad filed for separation, moved into an apartment, and began attending therapy to process his feelings of guilt and betrayal. The separation seemed to finally crack Mom's denial. 3 months after Dad moved out, she contacted me asking to meet. I agreed with trepidation, unsure if I was ready to face her again. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Mom looked different, smaller, somehow less perfectly put together than I remembered. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began after we'd settled with our drinks. And a lot of therapy at your father's insistence. I nodded but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. I still believe I was trying to do what was best for both you and Audrey, she said. But I can now see that my actions caused you significant harm regardless of my intentions. It wasn't exactly the full acknowledgement of wrongdoing I had hoped for, but it was more self-awareness than she had shown previously. My therapist has helped me understand that I was projecting my own issues onto both of you, she continued. I favored Audrey because I saw myself in her, and I pushed you away because your independence reminded me of my own father, who was cold and distant. That doesn't excuse what you did, I said quietly. No, it doesn't. She agreed, surprising me. Nothing excuses lying to your father or watching you struggle when we had the means to help you. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Norton. I just wanted you to know that I am trying to understand why I made those choices so I don't continue to hurt the people I'm supposed to love. Our conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. While it didn't magically repair our relationship, it opened a door that I had assumed would remain permanently closed. Mom and I now talk on the phone once a month, brief, somewhat stilted conversations, but communication nonetheless. Dad and Mom are in marriage counseling, their future still uncertain. Dad told me recently that while he's not sure if their marriage can be saved, the therapy is helping them communicate more honestly than they have in decades. Either way, I'll be okay, he assured me. The most important thing is that you and Audrey are healing from the damage we caused. As for me, I graduated with honors last month. With my financial situation stabilized, I've accepted a position with a nonprofit organization that helps first-generation college students navigate financial aid and scholarships. The salary is modest, but the work feels meaningful, a way to perhaps prevent others from experiencing the struggles I endured. My experience has taught me several profound lessons that I carry with me every day. First, honesty is the foundation of any healthy relationship, especially within families. The years of deception created wounds that may never fully heal, despite our best efforts. Second, financial transparency is crucial. Dad and I now have an open dialogue about money, and I've encouraged Audrey to learn about budgeting and financial management skills Mom never taught her. Third, and perhaps most importantly, I've learned that while we can't choose our family of origin, we can choose how we respond to the hand we're dealt. I could have allowed the betrayal to embitter me, to close me off from trusting others. Instead, I've chosen to use the experience as a catalyst for growth and greater empathy. The road ahead still has its challenges. There are days when the anger resurfaces when I think about the unnecessary struggles I endured because of Mom's deception, but those moments grow less frequent with time. What happened to me was profoundly unfair, but it also shaped me into someone who understands the value of hard work, honesty, and perseverance. Those qualities will serve me well throughout my life, even as I continue to heal from the betrayal that revealed them. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: family secrets have a way of eventually coming to light, and when they do, the damage can be extensive. But even in the aftermath of such painful revelations, healing is possible if there's a willingness to face the truth with courage and compassion. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal that changed your perspective on trust? How did you move forward from it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our deepest wounds.